The structural integrity of the balcony attached to apartment 4B was, by every observable visual metric, mathematically compromised. I knew this because I am a senior landscape architect, and my specific professional domain involves calculating the exact load-bearing capacity of retaining walls, heavy hydraulic drainage systems, and exterior structures suspended over highly unstable terrain. It is a profession built entirely on the ruthless, unforgiving laws of physics and water displacement. Gravity does not negotiate. Moisture ingress does not care about aesthetic design. From my vantage point on the adjacent balcony of apartment 4A, the physical data was irrefutable. The wrought iron railing enclosing 4B was suffering from advanced, stage 3 oxidation, the rust eating deeply into the primary anchor joints. Where the metal met the masonry, the concrete slab itself exhibited visible, jagged micro-fissures radiating outward from the wall bolts, a clear indication of internal rebar expansion due to severe water damage. Furthermore, the sheer volume of unregulated, heavy ceramic plant pots clustered intentionally on the far western edge exceeded the safe deadweight limit of the aging mid-century structure by an estimated 300 pounds. It was exactly 0600 hours on a Tuesday. The ambient temperature was 42 degrees Fahrenheit, accompanied by a biting, localized wind chill sweeping off the nearby river. I stood on my own meticulously cleared balcony, drinking black, heavily caffeinated coffee from a steel-insulated thermos, conducting my standard daily visual assessment of the building's central courtyard before departing for a site grading in New Jersey. The heavy glass sliding door of apartment 4B scraped loudly along its oxidized aluminum track. The woman who had occupied the unit for the past 2 months stepped out onto her structurally doomed slab. Her name was Lola Wright. She was 39 years old. I knew her name and occupation solely because the building's centralized mail delivery system was highly inefficient, frequently requiring me to redeliver misrouted promotional flyers for her independent wellness and yoga coaching business. Her personal methodology appeared entirely chaotic. She wore oversized, faded linen pants that offered zero thermal protection, a heavy, mismatched woolen sweater, and no footwear. She possessed an impressive degree of physical flexibility, which she immediately demonstrated by dropping into a deep stretch, followed rapidly by a complex, inverted balancing posture directly next to the severely oxidized iron railing. I narrowed my eyes, watching the physics play out in real time. The heavy concrete slab visibly shifted downward by approximately a quarter inch under the sudden, unregulated transfer of kinetic energy. A faint, terrible grinding noise echoed from the masonry joints, barely audible over the morning traffic. I set my thermos down on the small, strictly functional metal table beside me. I zipped my heavy canvas work jacket up to my chin to block the wind, stepped to the edge of my boundary, and leaned slightly over my railing. "The primary anchor points on the western edge of your concrete slab are actively failing," I called out. My voice is a naturally dry, flat rumble, calibrated to carry easily across the 20-foot gap without sounding panicked. Panic is a useless emotion on an active job site. If you execute another lateral shift in your body weight, you risk detaching the pad from the primary masonry. Lola lost her physical equilibrium immediately. Her legs dropped from their inverted position, her bare feet landing heavily on the concrete with a loud, hollow thud that reverberated through the courtyard. The balcony visibly shuddered, shedding a small cascade of gray concrete dust into the empty air below. She let out a sharp gasp, her hands flying out to grab the rusted iron railing to steady her swaying body. "Please step entirely away from the railing," I instructed, maintaining a perfectly level, unhurried tone. "The oxidation has severely compromised the tensile strength of the iron. I do not recommend relying on it for lateral support." She blinked rapidly, staring at me across the open gap. The sudden exertion and the biting cold air had flushed her cheeks a deep, vivid pink. Dark strands of hair were falling out of a messy, inefficient knot at the top of her head, whipping around her face in the wind. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice breathless, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and residual adrenaline. "I am Jacob Sanders. I occupy Unit 4A, I stated, offering a factual, necessary introduction to establish credibility. I am a licensed, high-end landscape architect. My firm specializes in exterior site stability, drainage routing, and earth-retaining structural failures. Your balcony is structurally deficient. If you continue to practice high-impact, kinetic exercise on that specific quadrant, you will drastically accelerate the shear force on those rusted bolts. Lola stared down at the gray concrete beneath her bare, freezing feet, then looked slowly back up at me. She did not argue. She did not accuse me of exaggeration. She carefully, meticulously stepped backward, sliding her feet along the concrete until her spine pressed against the solid brick wall of the building, right next to her sliding glass door. "Thank you," she said, her voice cautious, her brain rapidly analyzing my sudden, blunt intervention. I hadn't noticed the cracks in the floor. Most civilians do not observe structural failure until the collapse is imminent and catastrophic, I replied, picking up my steel thermos. Furthermore, I highly recommend migrating your large ceramic planters indoors today. They are contributing unnecessary dead weight to an active moisture failure point. You are exacerbating the decay. I turned my back to the courtyard, intending to walk back inside and commence my workday. "Wait," Lola called out, leaning slightly out of her doorframe, keeping her weight firmly anchored over the internal floor joists. "I'm Lola. Lola Wright. I moved in a few weeks ago." "I am aware," I said, pausing with my hand on my door handle. "You play Tibetan singing bowls at exactly 2,100 hours every Thursday evening. The acoustic frequencies penetrate the shared ventilation shaft between our bathrooms." A bright, sudden flush of absolute mortification crept up her neck, staining her skin. "Oh, God. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize the sound traveled through the vents. I use them to clear the energy in the space after my online client sessions. I can absolutely turn it down, or stop entirely." "It is not an offensive or disruptive frequency," I noted objectively, observing her immediate willingness to adapt. "It simply exists within the acoustic environment. Secure your planters, Miss Wright." I slid my door shut, locking the heavy latch, assuming the interaction was a firmly concluded, contained variable. I had identified a hazard, provided the necessary empirical data, and she had accepted it. The system was balanced. I walked to my drafting table, booted my dual monitors, and spent the next 10 hours calculating topsoil displacement and subterranean drainage matrices for a corporate campus. I did not factor Lola Wright into my operational schedule. 2 days later, the building's predatory homeowners association transformed my casual structural observation into a weaponized financial penalty. It was Thursday evening. The sun had set, and the temperature had dropped below freezing. I was in my apartment, reviewing a highly complex, three-dimensional grading plan for a massive hillside estate, when a sharp, frantic, and highly irregular series of knocks rattled my front door. I did not immediately open it. I pulled up the hallway security feed on my tertiary monitor. Lola was standing in the corridor outside my unit. She was holding a thick, legal-size manila envelope against her chest. Her posture was completely rigid, entirely stripped of the fluid, relaxed calm she had exhibited on the balcony. She was shifting her weight from foot to foot, trapped in a clear state of acute anxiety. I disengaged the heavy brass deadbolt, the tumbler sliding back with a solid metallic clack, and pulled the fire-rated steel door open. "I'm sorry to bother you so late," Lola said immediately, her words rushing out in a tight, vibrating stream of genuine distress. "I know we barely spoke the other morning, but Clara from 3B, I met her in the laundry room. She said you understand municipal building codes and exterior structures." I didn't know who else to ask. "I don't know anyone in this city. State the exact nature of the problem," I instructed, my voice a low, grounding baseline. I stepped back, holding the door open to allow her to enter the controlled environment of my apartment. Lola walked in. She glanced briefly at the sparse, strictly functional layout of my living room. The massive, illuminated drafting table, the severe lack of soft furnishings, and absolutely zero decorative items or photographs. She handed me the manila envelope. Her fingers were trembling. "It's from Richard, the HOA president," she explained, wrapping her arms defensively around her own chest, attempting to physically contain her panic. "He slipped it under my door an hour ago. He's officially citing me for extreme structural negligence regarding the condition of my balcony. He's levying a $10,000 fine, payable in full within 14 days, or he initiates formal, expedited eviction proceedings." I pulled the heavy stack of documents from the envelope. I bypassed the aggressive, flowery legal threats designed to intimidate laypeople, and my eyes scanned directly down the page to the specific municipal citation codes he was leveraging. "He is claiming that the sheer weight of your ceramic planters, combined with the kinetic impact of your physical exercise, directly caused the foundational cracks in the concrete slab." I noted aloud, my brain instantly evaluating the physics of his accusation. I flipped to the second page. He included photographs taken from the courtyard below, using a telephoto lens. He states the repair costs fall entirely on you as the tenant due to a breach of the reasonable use clause in the HOA bylaws. I don't have $10,000, Jacob, she whispered. The dam broke, and the sheer terror of her financial reality bled into her voice. I just moved to this city to start over after a horrific divorce. I drained my savings for the deposit on this apartment. I'm barely covering the monthly rent while I try to build a local client base for my coaching business. If he evicts me, I lose my deposit. I lose my business. I lose everything. Panic is a processing error, I said, stepping closer to her, ensuring my voice carried absolute, unshakable authority. It burns necessary cognitive energy without generating a practical, actionable output. Stop panicking. Look at the photographs. I handed her one of the printed, glossy images Richard had included in the packet. It showed the underside of her balcony, taken from an upward angle. What am I looking at? She asked, her hands shaking slightly as she held the paper up to the light of my monitors. You are looking at exposed, oxidized rebar, I said, pointing a steady finger at a dark, rusted line bleeding through the gray concrete in the image. The specific structural decay visible in this photograph is the direct result of long-term exterior water intrusion. The phenomenon is called concrete spalling. When improperly routed rainwater penetrates the concrete over years, it rusts the internal steel rebar. The rust expands, cracking the concrete from the inside out. This degree of spalling takes a minimum of 5 to 7 years to visually manifest. I looked directly into her frightened eyes. It is a building-wide exterior maintenance failure, I stated emphatically. Your ceramic planters did not cause this. Your yoga practice did not cause this. Richard is executing a highly fraudulent, scientifically impossible citation. Lola stared at the photograph, her breath hitching in her throat. The data was slowly overriding her fear. Why would he do that? Why would he lie about the cause? Leverage, I stated simply. Walking over to my drafting table and setting the documents down. This building is located in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood. If he forces you out using a fabricated, insurmountable fine, he seizes your deposit, immediately renovates the unit, and doubles the monthly rent for the next incoming tenant. He is utilizing bureaucratic intimidation because he assumes you lack the technical vocabulary and the financial capital to fight back. He's right, she admitted bitterly, dropping the photograph onto my desk. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. I don't know anything about concrete spalling, exterior flashing, or municipal building codes. I teach people how to breathe. He has the entire HOA board backing him. He has retained lawyers. He's going to win. He will not win, I countered, my jaw tightening incrementally. I reached under my drafting table and pulled a heavy, hard-shell Pelican case containing my site diagnostic tools, because I possess the exact technical vocabulary required to destroy his narrative. And I do not tolerate predatory inefficiency. Lola looked up at me, her eyes wide. What are you going to do? I am going to conduct a comprehensive exterior site drainage and water intrusion assessment of your balcony, I said, grabbing my heavy canvas work jacket from a hook by the door. And then I am going to formally dismantle his citation using verifiable data. We walked back down the quiet, carpeted corridor to her apartment. Her space was the exact opposite of mine. It was incredibly warm, heavily cluttered, filled with vibrant, hand-woven textiles, massive, thriving floor plants, and the faint, lingering, grounding scent of sandalwood and old books. It was highly inefficient in terms of floor space, yet undeniably, profoundly welcoming. Stay inside the thermal envelope of the apartment, I instructed, unlocking her sliding glass door and pulling it open. The freezing night air rushed into the warm room. I stepped out onto the cold, compromised concrete of the balcony. I did not offer her empty emotional reassurances. I went to work. I opened the Pelican case. I utilized a high-end digital laser level to verify the exact degree of downward deflection in the concrete slab. I used a specialized, non-destructive moisture meter, pressing the dual prongs against the exterior masonry joints where the balcony met the brick wall. The digital readout spiked into the red zone, indicating severe, active water retention deep within the wall cavity, originating from above. I used an ultrasonic thickness gauge to measure the structural degradation of the oxidized iron railing. Finally, I documented every square inch of the spalling, the failed caulking, and the improper exterior flashing using a high-resolution macro lens attached to my mobile device. Lola stood inside, framed by the glass door, watching me in the cold. She didn't chatter nervously. She didn't ask incessant questions. She seemed to intuitively understand the required mechanics of intense, unbroken professional focus. After 35 minutes of rigorous exterior data collection, I packed my instruments, stepped back inside, and pulled the heavy glass door shut, locking the latch securely. The systemic failure is absolute and mathematically undeniable, I confirmed, noting the raw data numbers in a small, waterproof field notebook I kept in my jacket pocket. The exterior metal flashing installed directly above your balcony was improperly fitted during the original construction, disrupting the intended water flow. Rainwater has been bypassing the primary gutters and draining directly into the load-bearing masonry joints for at least a decade. As a landscape architect dealing with exterior water routing, I can definitively state this is a massive, highly actionable code violation on the part of the building management. So it's objectively not my fault, she breathed, the heavy, suffocating weight of the false accusation visibly lifting from her posture. It is their exclusive legal liability, I corrected, closing my notebook with a sharp snap. I will draft a formal, comprehensive water intrusion assessment tonight. While a structural engineer must execute the ultimate repair plan, my licensed assessment of the exterior drainage failure establishes undeniable probable cause for the city to intervene. We will present it to the HOA board. Lola walked over to her small, brightly tiled kitchen area. She turned on a kettle, poured a cup of hot water over a specialized loose-leaf tea blend, and brought the steaming ceramic mug over to me. She didn't hand it to me immediately. She stood close, her eyes searching the rigid, unyielding lines of my face. "You don't even know me, Jacob," she said softly, her voice entirely stripped of its defensive panic, leaving only a raw, profound curiosity. "You're a senior architect? You charge corporate clients massive fees for this exact kind of site evaluation. Why are you spending your Thursday night standing in the freezing cold to fight my landlord?" I looked at the steaming cup of tea in her hands. I analyzed her question. I detest seeing highly competent people bullied by corrupt, inefficient systems, I replied, maintaining a factual, clipped cadence, though my voice was noticeably rougher than usual. And earlier this week, when I provided you with structural data regarding the singing bowls, you immediately adjusted your behavior without initiating a conflict. You demonstrated a willingness to cooperate with the established environment. You are respectful. I respect that. A faint, incredibly genuine smile broke across her face. It completely altered the geometry of her features, softening the exhausted lines around her eyes. She handed me the tea. Her fingers briefly brushed mine. The transfer of heat was instantaneous and entirely unregulated. "You have a very strange, very rigid way of being kind, Jacob Sanders," she murmured. "I am not kind. I am practical," I corrected, taking a slow sip. The tea was a complex blend of chamomile and valerian root. It was scientifically proven to be highly effective at lowering baseline heart rates and reducing cortisol. The HOA Board Tribunal meets tomorrow, Friday, at 1,800 hours. Do not engage in any verbal or written communication with Richard before then. Do not sign anything. "I won't," she promised. For the next 24 hours, the dynamic shifted from crisis management to structured, aggressive execution. I did not sleep. I spent the entire night compiling the exterior site data, cross-referencing specific municipal drainage and building codes, citing legal precedents regarding landlord negligence and exterior envelope failures, and drafting an irrefutable 15-page forensic assessment. I did not ignore Lola during this timeline. In fact, the localized nature of the conflict forced an acceleration in our proximity. On Friday morning at 0700 hours, a soft knock sounded at my door. I opened it to find Lola standing there, holding a small, insulated thermal container. "I made steel-cut oats with chia seeds and local honey," she said, holding it out. "I assumed you were up all night working on the report and forgot to synthesize breakfast. Chia seeds provide an efficient, slow-burning source of sustained kinetic energy," I noted, taking the container. Our fingers brushed again. I did not pull away. "The nutritional logic is sound. Thank you." At 1,300 hours, I knocked on her door to visually verify she had physically migrated the heavy ceramic planters entirely indoors, away from the compromised exterior edge. She let me in. We spent exactly 18 minutes standing in her living room, discussing the specific root structures of the native ferns she was cultivating. She explained how the ferns thrived in highly hostile, low-light environments by establishing deep, unbreakable anchor systems. The metaphorical parallel to her own survival strategy was obvious, but I did not point it out. The conversation was highly informative. The subtle, undeniable shift in my internal routine, the sudden anticipation of seeing her, was a variable I could no longer ignore. Friday evening. 1,750 hours. I stood in the hallway outside my apartment, wearing a sharp, dark charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and no tie. Lola stepped out of apartment 4B. She had abandoned the loose, comfortable linen pants and oversized sweaters. She wore a tailored, dark navy blazer, a white silk blouse, and sharply creased dark trousers. It was armor designed for a boardroom. She looked rigid, her jaw clenched tight, physically preparing her nervous system for a confrontation she believed would be deeply, emotionally unpleasant. I didn't offer a patronizing pep talk. I simply nodded once, affirming my physical presence and operational readiness, and led the way down the long, carpeted hall to the building's communal meeting room on the ground floor. Richard sat at the head of a long, cheap folding table. He was flanked by 3 other members of the HOA board, 2 older men and 1 woman, all of whom looked annoyed to be there. Richard was a man who utilized administrative bylaws to compensate for a severe lack of actual authority in the real world. His ego required constant, localized validation. He sneered aggressively as Lola walked into the room. "Miss Wright," Richard announced loudly, projecting his voice to immediately establish dominance over the acoustic space. "You are exactly on time for your formal fine assessment and eviction warning. And who is this individual? You are strictly not permitted legal counsel at a preliminary, internal board review." "Mr. Sanders is not my legal counsel," Lola stated, taking a seat at the opposing end of the folding table. Her voice was perfectly modulated, utilizing the exact, deep respiratory control she taught in her wellness classes to keep the tremor out of her words. "He is my retained structural and site consultant." I did not sit down. Sitting relinquishes physical leverage in a negotiation space. I remained standing. I placed my heavy leather briefcase on the table and popped the brass latches simultaneously. The sharp metallic clicks echoed loudly like gunshots in the quiet room. "The board has thoroughly reviewed the photographs of your balcony, Lola," Richard announced, tapping a thick file folder with his pen. "The structural damage is severe and undeniable. The sheer, unregulated weight of your unauthorized ceramic planters, combined with your reckless, kinetic physical activity, directly caused the foundational cracking of the concrete pad. The $10,000 fine stands. If you refuse to pay by the end of this session, we initiate the eviction with the city marshal on Monday morning. Your assessment of the physical causality is structurally illiterate and mathematically impossible," I interjected, my voice a deep, flat rumble that cut straight through his bureaucratic bluster like a scythe through dry grass. Richard's face flushed a dark, angry red. He slammed his hand flat on the table. "Excuse me? Who the hell do you think you are?" "You are excused," I replied smoothly, maintaining absolute, unwavering, dead-eyed contact with him. I did not raise my voice. Volume is the refuge of the weak. I reached into my open briefcase. I pulled out 3 thick, spiral-bound dossiers and slid them across the slick surface of the table directly to the 3 independent board members. I specifically did not hand a copy to Richard. "What is this?" the woman on the board asked, frowning at the heavy, highly detailed document. "It is a formally stamped, legally binding exterior site drainage and water intrusion assessment of balcony 4B, I stated, projecting my voice to ensure every person in the room heard the absolute, unassailable mathematical reality. It details a catastrophic failure of the exterior metal flashing installed directly above the unit. Improper water routing has been actively eroding the load-bearing masonry and rusting the internal rebar for over a decade. By my calculated estimate, Miss Wright's ceramic planters represent less than 2% of the total required dead load to fracture that concrete. They are statistically irrelevant to the structural decay." Richard stood up, his chair scraping violently against the linoleum floor. "This is a complete fabrication. You're just her neighbor. You live in 4A. You're trying to bail her out so you can sleep with her." The crude, highly unprofessional insult hung in the air. Lola gasped, recoiling slightly. I did not flinch. I did not react to the emotional bait. I am a licensed senior landscape architect. My operational domain encompasses exterior drainage, heavy hydraulics, and structural retaining systems. I countered smoothly, my posture relaxed but completely dominant. While a structural engineer must sign off on the final repair schematics, my certified assessment of the exterior drainage failure establishes undeniable legal liability. My official seal carries weight in civil court. Your smartphone photographs carry nothing but malicious, unverified intent. I reached back into my briefcase. I pulled a single, highly sensitive sheet of paper from a separate folder and tossed it onto the center of the table. Furthermore, I continued, my tone dropping to an icy, terrifying whisper that forced the entire room to lean in. My visual audit confirms that balconies 4A, 4C, 3B, and 2B suffer from the exact same systemic exterior water ingress. The entire western facade of this building is structurally compromised and bordering on critical failure. The required retrofitting and repair costs will exceed $250,000. The room went completely, devastatingly silent. The heavy, oppressive silence of a trap snapping entirely shut around the predators. The three independent board members stared at the documents, the sheer, crushing financial reality of the massive liability crashing down on them in real time. You attempted to extort $10,000 from a single, newly arrived tenant to secretly fund a fraction of a massive, building-wide repair that you legally neglected to disclose to the State Housing Authority, I stated, staring directly into Richard's panicked eyes. It is a textbook case of gross administrative negligence, targeted harassment, and financial fraud. You can't prove I knew about the other balconies, Richard stammered, stepping back from the table, his hands shaking violently as his entire petty empire collapsed. I don't need to prove your prior knowledge, I said, snapping my briefcase shut, because I submitted a verified digital copy of this entire water intrusion assessment to the Municipal Building Inspector's office at 1,300 hours today. They have sufficient probable cause to be here on Monday morning at 0800 hours to physically red tag the entire western facade of this building. Richard looked at the other board members. They were already pulling out their cell phones, utterly terrified of the impending municipal fines, the safety violations, and the potential lawsuits from the other tenants. He realized his localized leverage had just evaporated into thin air. If you attempt to enforce this fraudulent fine against Miss Wright, or if you take one single step toward initiating eviction proceedings, I dictated, issuing the final, non-negotiable terms of his surrender, my retained counsel will file an immediate injunction and formally organize a tenant coalition complaint with the Municipal Housing Authority. The fine is immediately dismissed, the woman on the board said instantly, standing up and looking at Richard with sheer, unfiltered disgust. The eviction is canceled. Effective, right now. We need to call an emergency commercial contractor. Richard, you are stepping down as president. The structural threat is permanently neutralized, I announced softly, looking down at Lola. We are leaving. Lola did not say a word to Richard. She did not need to gloat. She simply stood up, smoothed the fabric of her blazer, and walked out of the meeting room with her head held high. I followed her out into the quiet, carpeted hallway. The air in the corridor felt significantly lighter. The massive, suffocating weight of the extortion had entirely evaporated, leaving behind the pure, unadulterated adrenaline of victory. Lola stopped halfway down the corridor, right outside the door to my apartment. She turned to face me. The rigid, defensive armor she had worn for the meeting dissolved completely, leaving only raw, unfiltered, profound gratitude. You completely dismantled him, she said, her voice filled with quiet, awestruck wonder. You walked into that room and took apart my worst nightmare in under 4 minutes, using nothing but building codes, drainage assessments, and math. He operated on a fundamentally flawed structural premise, I corrected, keeping my hands resting near the sturdy handle of my briefcase. He assumed you were isolated and vulnerable. He failed to account for a verified architectural audit. He didn't know I had a structural ghost in my corner, she smiled, stepping closer. She reached out. She didn't shake my hand. She placed her palm flat against the center of my chest, right over my sternum, right over my rapidly beating heart. It was a deeply grounding, intensely personal contact that sent a shockwave through my highly regulated nervous system. I froze. The sensory input spiked drastically. My heart rate elevated from a steady 60 to over 90 beats per minute. A sudden, powerful rhythm drumming against my ribs. I didn't pull away. I didn't step back. I allowed the uncalculated variable to fully process. Your heart is racing, Jacob, she murmured, looking up into my eyes, her thumb lightly tracing the heavy canvas fabric of my jacket lapel. It is a biological response to an unregulated environmental shift, I admitted, my voice dropping to a rough, quiet rumble in the empty hallway. The cynical, isolated detachment I had maintained for years was entirely, irrevocably fractured by her proximity and her undeniable warmth. Is it a dangerous shift? She whispered, stepping a fraction of an inch closer, her gaze locked firmly on mine. No, I replied. I lifted my right hand. I wrapped my fingers gently over hers where it rested against my chest. I held her hand against my racing heart, abandoning the role of the objective, distant observer. It is the most structurally sound variable I've encountered in a decade. Lola smiled, a brilliant, genuine expression that fundamentally altered the geometry of her face, erasing the last lingering traces of her prior trauma. She didn't demand a grand, dramatic, romantic speech. She understood the profound language of actions, of safety proven in the absolute highest-stakes environment. My balcony is going to be red-tagged and entirely off-limits for yoga for the next 3 months while they fix the spalling, she noted softly. Her eyes locked on mine with absolute certainty. I need to completely restructure my morning routine. I was thinking of moving my practice down to the central courtyard, but it requires a significant amount of heavy lifting to clear the old landscaping debris to create a flat, stable space. I am highly efficient at heavy lifting and site grading, I promised, the rigid, cynical walls of my isolation permanently dissolving under her touch. And I possess the specific tools required to level the earth perfectly flat. I will have the coffee ready at 0600, she said, squeezing my hand tightly. The end.